Taylor stood motionless in the hallway, her palm delicately resting on the cool, polished wood of the Forrester mansion's banister. The familiar hum of voices echoed from the living room, which had once been her sanctuary, full of laughter, love, and the promise of eternity. It now felt like a battlefield, with each word a possible landmine. She hadn't intended to eavesdrop, she'd simply come to retrieve a misplaced scarf, but Ridge's desperation stopped her in her tracks. His tone was low and raw, tinged with vulnerability, which she hadn't heard in years. Taylor's heart constricted when Brooke followed with a softer, imploring voice. She recognized that tone too well. It was the sound of Brooke Logan striving for what she had always desired. Ridge. Taylor drew closer, her breath short, the silk scarf forgotten in her fingers. The weight of the moment crushed against her chest, foreshadowing something life-changing. She'd been through too much with Ridge, decades of love, betrayal, heartbreak, and fleeting glimpses of hope, to ignore the instinct that begged her to listen. The door to the living room was slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of light into the dim corridor, and she positioned herself just out of sight, her body rigid as if braced for a physical attack. "Brooke, you can't keep doing this," Ridge exclaimed, his voice heavy with frustration. "You can't keep changing history to get what you want. We've gone through this too many times." Taylor scrunched her brow. She knew Ridge's displeasure with Brooke often sprang from their tangled past, but there was an edge to his comments today, something deeper, more final. She leaned closer, striving to hear every syllable. "I'm not rewriting anything, Ridge," Brooke responded, her voice quivering but firm. "I'm telling you the truth, our truth. What we had and still have is real. You can't just walk away from that out of some misguided feeling of obligation." Taylor's stomach twisted. Duty? Was Brooke talking about her? What about Ridge's attempt to rebuild his life with Taylor following their most recent reconciliation? She pushed a hand to her breast, wishing her heart would calm, but it hammered furiously, each beat repeating the fear that had plagued her for years. Ridge's heart would always belong to Brooke, no matter how many times he vowed otherwise. "Duty?" Ridge raised his voice, angry and incredulous. "Do you think that's what this is?" "Brooke, I made a decision. I went with Taylor. I opted to rebuild our family and provide our children with the stability they lacked previously. This isn't about duty, it's about love." Taylor's breath caught, and a glimmer of warmth spread through her with his words. He had selected her. He had said it before, of course, in quiet moments when it was just the two of them, but hearing it now, unfiltered, raw, and directed at Brooke, was different. It felt real. The feeling, however, was ephemeral, pushed away by the thought of how many times Ridge had wavered, how many times he'd stood at this exact crossroads and chosen another path. "Then why are we here, Ridge?" Brooke's voice cracked and Taylor saw her standing there, blonde hair framing her face, eyes sparkling with that combination of drive and desperation that had always made her formidable. "Why are we still having this conversation? If you're so convinced about Taylor, why do I still feel a draw toward me? Why do I see that in your eyes whenever we're in the same room?" Taylor's palm clenched around the scarf, crumpling it in her fist. She wanted to barge in, demand answers, and finally put an end to this never-ending tug of battle. But her feet would not move. She was glued to the spot, locked by her desire to know, to hear the truth, whatever it was. Ridge was silent for a long time, and Taylor could almost picture him running his hand through his hair and pacing like he often did when trapped. "Because it's complicated, Brooke," he finally explained, his voice quieter and almost dejected. "You and I have a history. Most individuals could never imagine how much history exists. However, this does not imply that I belong there. Not anymore." Taylor's eyes hurt, and she blinked quickly, refusing to shed tears. She'd heard versions of this before. Ridge's attempts to separate himself from Brooke, to convince himself and her that their narrative was done. But Brooke's following words were like a knife, ripping through Taylor's frail hope. "Then why didn't you tell her?" Brooke inquired, her voice barely above a whisper but heavy with accusation. "If you were so certain, Ridge, why didn't you tell Taylor about us? About what happened that night?" Taylor's world tilted. Her fingers moved to her mouth, stifling a gasp. What night? What exactly had happened? Her thoughts raced, repeating every detail of the last few months in search of clues. Ridge had been distant and distracted at times, but she attributed it to work, the pressures of running Forrester Creations, and the never-ending drama of their blended families. Did she miss something? Had she been naive to another betrayal? What are you talking about? Ridge's voice was now angry and guarded, and Taylor's heart sunk even lower. She recognized that tone. It was the sound of a guy trapped, attempting to hide his tracks. Don't play dumb, Ridge, Brooke warned, her voice tightening. You understand exactly what I mean. That night in Monte Carlo, we were attending the fashion summit. You and I crossed a line. And you promised me that you would tell Taylor the truth. But didn't you? You returned to her like nothing had happened, and led her to believe you were committed. Taylor's knees buckled, and she held herself against the wall, breathing in shallow breaths. Monte Carlo. 6 months ago. Ridge had returned from his trip quieter than usual, but he had been attentive and caring, even bringing her a necklace from a small boutique he had discovered in the city. She'd assumed it was a show of devotion, that they were finally on firm ground. Now the remembrance of that necklace felt like a lie, a sparkling diversion from reality. Brooke, that was a mistake, Ridge stated quietly, almost imploring. It was one night. We were both emotional and caught up in the moment. It did not mean anything. Didn't mean anything? Brooke's voice raised sharply with incredulity. Ridge, you cannot say that. You can't stand there and pretend nothing happened. Ridge, we made love. We bonded like we normally do. And I'm sure you felt it too. Taylor's vision dimmed, and tears flowed despite her efforts to push them back. She put her hand firmly over her mouth, suppressing a sob. Made love. The words rang in her head, each syllable a fresh wound. She could image Ridge and Brooke twisted together in a luxury hotel suite, the moonlight shining through the windows, their history drawing them back into each other's arms. She'd imagined the situation 1,000 times over the years, hoping that it was behind them and that they'd finally moved on. But here it was again, as authentic and honest as ever. Brooke, stop, Ridge replied, his voice steady yet strained. I told you that it was a mistake. I was bewildered and we were both grieving. Losing Stephanie and the company's direction screwed with my head. But I went home to see Taylor. I chose her. Taylor's heart twisted, alternating between relief and wrath. He had chosen her, but only after betraying her. Again. Ridge's vows of love and promises of devotion were almost always followed by some discovery that crushed her trust. She wanted to shout, to rush in and confront them both, but her body felt heavy, and her limbs refused to move. She wanted to hear more and comprehend the full extent of this treachery, before she could confront it. Grieving. Brooke's tone was skeptical and even contemptuous. Ridge, you cannot use your mother's death as an excuse. You wanted me that night. You selected me. And now you're lying to yourself and Taylor, claiming nothing happened. How is this fair to her? To any of us? Taylor's sobs flowed quicker now, muted but relentless. She had always known Brooke was unrelenting, but this was a new level of cruelty. Even Brooke thought it was a low blow to use their common grief over Stephanie's death as a weapon against Ridge. Nonetheless, Taylor couldn't dispute the truth in her remarks. Ridge had not told her. He'd returned home, kissed her, held her, and made love to her, all while keeping this secret. The thought made her stomach churn, and bile rose in her throat. I didn't tell her because it would destroy her, Ridge explained, his voice breaking. Taylor has been through enough. She does not deserve this. She does not deserve to have her heart destroyed again because to a mistake I made. Then why are you still here, Ridge? Brooke pressed, her voice lower and almost gentle. Why are you standing here talking to me instead of being with her? If you're so certain she's your future, why can't you let me go? Taylor's breath caught, and her entire body trembled. She wanted to hear Ridge's response, needed to hear it, but the anguish was crushing, like a tidal wave about to drown her. She couldn't stand there any longer and couldn't take another word. She turned and fled down the corridor, her scarf dropping from her grasp and landing on the plush carpet. She had no idea where she was heading, only that she needed to get away from the oppressive weight of what she just heard. She stumbled inside the guest room, closed the door and resting against it, her chest heaving. The room was still, the air motionless, in stark contrast to the tumult in her mind. She slumped to the floor, her back against the door, and let the tears fall freely, hot and merciless. How many times had she come here? How many times had she repaired her life, her heart, just to have Ridge and Brooke destroy it again? She'd worked so hard to believe in him, to think that this time was different, that their love was greater than before. But it wasn't. Never would be. The memories returned. Every moment she'd spent loving Ridge, every sacrifice she'd made for their family. She remembered their children, Steffi and Thomas, who had grown up in the shadow of this never-ending triangle, their lives affected by the relentless push and pull of their parents' decisions. She reflected on the years she'd spent reconstructing herself after each heartache, assuring herself that she was enough and didn't need Ridge to be complete. And yet, there she was, shattered anew with fragments of her heart scattered at her feet. She had no idea how long she remained there, her sobs quieting to a dull ache. The home was silent now. The conversation in the living room had ended. She wondered if Ridge and Brooke were still there, engrossed in their own drama, unaware of the havoc they'd wrought. Perhaps they'd gone on, like they often did, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone. Taylor eventually rose up, wiping her tear-stained cheeks with the back of her hand. She saw her reflection in the mirror across the room, her eyes crimson and her countenance troubled. She hardly recognized herself. This was not the strong, resilient woman she had struggled to be. This was the Taylor from years ago, crushed and betrayed, clinging to a love that had always seemed just out of grasp. But something changed inside her when she looked at her reflection. A spark of rage, of defiance came to life. She was tired of being left behind, forgiving and rebuilding. She'd spent too many years allowing Ridge and Brooke to determine her happiness and worth. No more. She squared her shoulders and took a big breath. The pain was still intense and unyielding, but it was no longer paralyzing. She wasn't sure what she'd do next, whether she'd confront Ridge, walk away, or demand answers from Brooke, but one thing was certain. She was done being the victim of their story. This time she would create her own finale. Taylor opened the door and walked back into the hallway, her scarf still crumpled on the floor where she had left it. She left it there, a small reminder of the past she was eager to put behind. The home was quiet, but her heart was racing with a determination she hadn't felt in years. Whatever occurred next, she would take it on her own terms. And for the first time in a long time, that felt adequate.